Professor Alan Dershowitz, thank you very much for taking the time to join us for this interview.
Thank you so much.
I understand that you received yet another honor degree, this time from Tel Aviv University in the Interdisciplinary Center in Herzliya. And I say another because it's very hard to count all your titles and honors, right?
I appreciate very much the honor, and for me it's an honor to be identified with two such great universities.
You've been noted as the best criminal lawyer in the United States, right?
Other people have to make that judgment.
America's most peripatetic civil liberty lawyer, right? That's also been said, the top lawyer of last resort.
I never know whether that's a compliment or an insult, but people do come to me when it's too late.
And in the recent years, you were Israel's single most visible defender and Israel's attorney in the public opinion.
Well, it's tragic that Israel needs an attorney. It's tragic that I have to write a book called The Case for Israel. Nobody has to write the case for France or the case for Canada, but Israel unfortunately needs a defender, particularly in universities and in many parts of Europe and in many parts of the United States.
Well, I understand that you now got a job offer that would combine all these titles together, right?
Well, I can't confirm what offers I've had, but I can tell you this.
We're talking about the offer that Lieberman and Netanyahu gave you to be Israel's UN ambassador, and you said?
Well, I can't confirm anything. I can tell you this. It would have been the greatest honor for me to serve Israel. It would have been the greatest pleasure. I would have loved going to the UN and taking on the forces of evil and standing up for the forces of light. But I couldn't accept such an offer because it would raise all kinds of problems in the United States about allegations of dual loyalty. People would say, see, Dershowitz, who claims for years to be an American, looking out for America's interest and supporting Israel because it's good for America, now has revealed his true identity as an Israeli first. And it would raise all kinds of problems for the American Jewish community, I believe, and it wouldn't be good for Israel. This would become the story rather than the defense of Israel.
But we have Stanley Fischer, who did something very similar and is now staying a second term here as the head of the bank.
And it's a very different situation, because when you're the head of the bank in Israel, you're not potentially in conflict with the United States. Whereas if you're representing a country at the United Nations, there could be conflict with the country which you are part of and which you were born to. And so it's a very different situation. It would have been a great honor, and I would have loved to do it. But the circumstances were such that it would not be the right thing for Israel. It would not be the right thing for American Jews.
But, you know, I'm asking, what does it say about our situation as a country that we do need the lawyer of last resort to be our spokesman in the UN? Well, is our case that bad?
No, there are many, many good people in Israel who I hope will be offered and will take the job. It's a very difficult job because the United Nations is hostile territory. The General Assembly particularly, the United Nations Human Rights Council. These are very difficult because people don't listen. They come in with a predetermined agenda. Even the International Court of Justice doesn't have an open mind toward Israel. I like hard cases. Yeah. I like defending difficult clients. That's why it would have been such a great challenge for me, and I want to continue to support Israel in the international community as a lawyer and as a public intellectual.
So, you know, let's think of Israel, the state of Israel, walking into your office and, you know, having those, you know, client defense lawyers talks. It's all underprivileged. What would you tell us? Why is Israel's situation so bad? And when you talk to a client, you tell them the truth in the face. So what would we hear for you if we came to that talk, you know, in your office?
Well,
where are we going? Where are we doing wrong?
If I were asked to be Israel's lawyer, several things would come to mind. First, I would not accept the situation that exists now in many parts of Europe, where a man like General Shkedi, who was one of the great heroes of Israel, the head of the Air Force, the man who reduced the number of civilian casualties dramatically when he was the head of the Air Force, cannot walk the streets of London. I would walk
You know, now he's the CEO of El Al, he's not flying to London.
I know, and I would walk with him to London, get off the plane, and challenge the British. You want to arrest somebody? Arrest him. We will put together the greatest legal team ever assembled, and we will put Britain on trial and the rest of the world on trial.
It's not just Shkedi, it's Livni and Bogi. So you think they're making a mistake
I do.
By the fact that they're avoiding?
Absolutely. I think they should go to Great Britain. I think they should bring a lawsuit. If they don't want to go there personally, let them bring a lawsuit in court called a declaratory judgment. challenging the application of universal jurisdiction to Israelis. Let there be a trial. Let Israel make its case. It would prevail. It would show that no country faced with comparable threats has ever shown more concern for human rights, more concern for the rights of civilians. Is it perfect? No.
How can you
but
be
it's better than Great Britain. It's better than the United States. It's better than France. It's better than Russia. And you can't apply a double standard to Israel.
But how can you be so sure? You just mentioned how hostile the UN is and how hostile the public opinion is against Israel. Isn't that taking a chance, an unneeded chance?
You're always taking a chance when you go to court and when you litigate. But when justice and right is on your side, you should proudly stand up and present your case and not have to run back to the airplane or claim diplomatic immunity. It is undignified for a great independent sovereign country like Israel not to be able to walk the streets of London. The head of Hamas can walk the streets of London. The head of Hezbollah can walk the streets of London. But the former head of the Israeli Air Force has to avoid going to London when he's the head of El Al. It is a scandal, and Israel shouldn't accept it as a sovereign nation.
That's very interesting. That would be your number one tip when we walked into your office. In your permission, we'll make a short break and we'll be right back. הפסקה קצרה, ומיד כשנחזור ננסה לברר עם פרופסור דרשוביץ האם הוא מאוכזב מהנשיא אובמה ומתי הוא יגיד למדינת ישראל. עד כאן, מיד אנחנו חוזרים. תודה שחזרתם אלינו. אנחנו עם פרופסור אלן דרשוביץ. Professor Dershowitz, let's talk a little bit about the relations between Israel and the United States. Is it Israel and the United States, or is it Netanyahu and Obama?
Well, Israel and the United States are in fine shape. The vast majority of Americans support Israel. The vast majority of even college students support Israel. The most vocal college students are very anti-Israel. But
you have a personal experience with that.
A lot of personal experience. I've spoken probably at more colleges and universities than anybody else. And when I speak to an audience of 1,000 people, I'll see 150 or so very anti-Israel people screaming and yelling, and then there'll be maybe 50 or 60 very pro-Israel people, but there'll be 700 or 800 people in the middle who generally are supportive of Israel and supportive of American policy. Congress...
the foreign ministry is having second thoughts about sending people to speak into colleges.
Wrong. It's a big mistake. They should be sending people, but they should be sending the right people. You can't send the same person to go speak to the United Jewish Appeal, to me and my generation, and the same person to speak to young people. You have to send people of color, you have to send women, you have to send people who have had experience in the army, you have to send people who have an ability to communicate with young people effectively. And we should not give up on the battle for the hearts and minds of young people. Now, I say most Americans continue to support Israel, but there are two trends that are very disturbing. More Democrats than Republicans are falling away from Israel, and there are today more Democrats than Republicans, and the Democrats are in control. So that's an issue. And young people, although most young people still support Israel, there is a falling away. And there's an understanding. Look, my generation remembers the Six-Day War in 1973, the rescue of Entebbe. What does the younger generation remember? The war in Lebanon, the Intifada, the occupation.
The wall.
It's a very, very difficult. Security barrier, most Americans actually support the security barrier. And the Obama administration supports the security barrier. It's interesting that the Obama administration has come out against virtually everything going on in the West Bank except the security barrier. And I think the line in the sand that they've been trying to draw is, we will be critical of Israeli building in Jerusalem, we will be critical of Israeli building in the West Bank, but we will not be critical of Israeli action in self-defense. They condemned the Goldstone report, they supported Obama when he went to Sderot, supported Israeli action against the rockets in Gaza. So the line has been security, yes, but settlements, no, and the testing issue, of course, is going to be Iran.
But you're saying that there is a shift in the public opinion, especially in the young generation. So when Netanyahu says to the people and says in his cabinet, it's okay, don't think I have a problem with Obama, because what is important is the public opinion. And there Israel is strong and even getting more support. That is something that we should take into consideration and question it.
There are three elements. There is the relationship within the administration, which is very important. President Obama is going to be the president for the next 2.5 years and probably for the next 6.5 years. And so that's a reality. Even if American support is strong among the population and among Congress, the President of the United States is extraordinarily powerful, much stronger than prime ministers generally. The President, the executive power, is very powerful in the United States, and you don't serve at the will of Congress or at the will of the Parliament. You serve at the will of the voters. So there is a problem with the Obama administration. It's a problem that I think is in the process of being worked with.
Is it something personal between Netanyahu and Obama, or is it Obama himself, its I don't know, its set of values, its background, its heritage, is something that would have happened with any other Israeli prime minister?
I think it would have happened with any Israeli prime minister. Obama is a young man, and therefore he represents the younger generation attitude toward Israel. He's a man generally of the left on foreign policy. He has a foreign policy which basically says, be tougher to your friends than your enemies, extend a hand of warmth to your enemies, like Ahmadinejad, and be very, very tough with your friends. I don't necessarily think that's a great foreign policy. Also, he has an advisor, Rahm Emanuel, who has famously said, never let a crisis go to waste. And what happened when the Israelis foolishly made the announcement about building permits in North Jerusalem on a day when a good friend, Vice President Biden, was here, the administration in Washington jumped on that mistake and took advantage of the crisis. It should have been a one-day story because Prime Minister Netanyahu apologized, did the right thing, but instead Hillary Clinton called him, and then he was called into the White House. It became an opportunity for the administration to show publicly a more even-handed attitude.
But you're saying it's something personal about Obama and his background and whatever. So if you were Netanyahu, if you're Netanyahu, and you're going to meet Netanyahu, obviously, but when he talks to you as an attorney, as someone who's giving him advice, what would you tell him? How do you deal with this Obama in the White House, Obama administration?
It's very difficult because if you lose, you lose, and if you win, you lose. You can't be winning. You can't be outsmarting the United States administration. There has to be a reconciliation. There has to be a movement together, and the emphasis has to be on common points of interest. But the Israelis have to push back. When you hear statements made by some people in the Obama administration that Israel's building policies are endangering American lives, that is a false statement, a categorically false statement. And the Israelis have to push back on that, and those of us who support Israel have to push back on that. And we did, and those in the Obama administration who had made those statements have retracted them. And so I think that was a very important result.
When you say we did, what did you, can you give me an example how it works?
Well, I wrote a series of articles. Other people wrote a series of articles. I was able to prove empirically, give you two examples of empirical proof of why there's no relation between Israeli actions and American casualties. When Israel was willing to give up virtually everything, Camp David and Taba, 96% of the West Bank, 100% of the Gaza, divided Jerusalem, what was happening? Osama bin Laden was planning 9/11 exactly during that period of time. When Israel went into Gaza, Operation Cast Lead, no increase in American casualties in Afghanistan or in Iraq. There is no relationship. So you think it's working?
You think that has been taken back now?
Yes, it has been.
But do you believe, when you look at Netanyahu and Netanyahu's government, do you believe that this government will be the government to make the change, will be the government to go to a peace process? Will Netanyahu be able to pull back, I don't know, tens of thousands of settlers?
I hope so. I think Israel made a terrible mistake in Gaza when it didn't honor and reward the settlers when they left. They should have treated them far better. It set a terrible example and terrible model. It's going to make it much harder for Israel to insist, demand that settlers on the West Bank leave. There would have been difficulty in any event, but the way the Gaza settlers were treated created a very bad example for how the West Bank settlers think they will be treated.
So you believe Netanyahu can bring the change? And do you think that the Obama administration trusts Netanyahu? Is it a problem of trust there?
I don't think it's a problem of trust. I think it's a problem of proof. Everybody wants proof on the ground. Nobody does anything based on trust. Everybody wants to see actual results, actual action.
But maybe Obama is doing us a favor. After 40 years where the administration looked at the other side when they were building settlements here and not going by what both sides were committed to do, this administration comes and says, no, we're not going to look the other side anymore. We're doing you a favor. We're going to make you reach a solution.
Let's remember that the vast majority of American Jews and American supporters of Israel don't necessarily favor the settlements. And the settlements is not an issue for Americans. Americans care deeply about Israel's security. They don't care about the settlements. Maybe a majority of Israelis don't particularly love the settlements. The settlements are a function of the Israeli dysfunctional political system whereby extremist parties get a megaphone and have more influence than they ought to have. I would have no problem if the Obama administration put some pressure on Israel in regard to the settlements, as long as there's no linkage between that and security. The security of Israel has to remain paramount part of American foreign policy. At the moment, the Obama administration has done nothing to undercut Israel's security. We have to be concerned about qualitative military advantage. We have to be concerned about non-proliferation in most particularly Iran.
And if the Israeli government will come up to you and ask for your advice regarding Iran, would you tell them take any means necessary regardless of what America says, and if you have to strike, strike?
I'm not a military expert. I don't know what the potential advantages and disadvantages of a military strike are, but I am an expert in international law, and I do believe Israel has the absolute right under Article 51 of the UN Charter to take whatever action is necessary to prevent Iran from becoming a nuclear-armed nation. If one hopes there won't have to be a conflict between U.S. interests and Israeli interests, but I think the United States would inevitably defer to Israel and say, look, you're the folks on the front line. A nuclear-armed Iran would be terrible for American foreign policy. It would be terrible for Saudi Arabia. It would be terrible for the Middle East. It would be a game changer. I take seriously the Obama administration's promise that it will not allow it to happen. I hope the United States gets more directly involved in preventing Iran from getting nuclear weapons. But if it doesn't, Israel's a sovereign nation and has to take whatever actions it deems necessary for its preventive self-defense.
You know, one of the reasons you're getting this honor degree is, of course, your actions in the public arena for Israel. Isn't there a point where even you, Professor Dershowitz, will say enough is enough? Not everything the government does is kosher. I can't stand by this government no matter what.
Well, I've often been critical of Israeli policies. I opposed the settlements since 1973 when labor was supporting the settlements. I've been against civilian settlements. So I don't support all the policies of the Israeli government, which is another reason why I probably wouldn't be the best delegate or representative of the UN. I support Israel on its security. And by the way, I support Israel's right to go into Gaza and to go into Lebanon. I didn't get a vote in the cabinet. I'm not sure how I would have voted on whether it was a good idea. So I make a very sharp distinction between what Israel has the right to do and what Israel should do as a matter of policy.
But you know, there are more and more Jews around the world. We have J Street and now J Call, this petition that was published in the beginning of this week by leading French Jewish intellectuals, which are basically saying this is not in the best interest of Israel that we continue unconditionally to support her. We should tell Israel, stop building, do that, change things. That's the way we should secure Israel's, existence, because if we don't do that, Israel is in danger.
But I've been doing that for years. Many of Israel's supporters have been doing that for years. I would like to see the pro-Israel community speak with one voice on these issues. When I write my books, for example, The Case for Israel, The Case for Peace, I make what I call the 80% argument. I don't deal with the settlements in Jerusalem. That's not my issue. I deal with security. I deal with the 80% in which there is a widespread consensus. Why I disagree with J Street is J Street focuses on the 20%, the places where there are disagreements, and I would rather focus on the areas of agreement.
What you're saying is we'll deal with the dirty laundry inside, and the outside we should be unified.
We should be unified about Israel's security. That, to me, is the crucial issue.
Is your job getting harder?
It's getting harder. It's always getting harder. I love hard jobs, and I think we are being successful. I think we are moving the process in the right direction.
So with your permission, we'll make one more break. עוד הפסקה, ומיד אחריה ננסה לברר מה פרופסור דרשוביץ היה מייעץ לאהוד אולמרט, וגם על המשפט שהוא לא ישכח, האויבי סימפסון, כמו שהוא קורא לו, מיד אנחנו חוזרים. תודה שחזרתם אלינו. I just have to tell you, Professor Alan Dershowitz, the name Goldstone, and you lose your temper.
Well, Goldstone was a friend of mine. I had him over my house for dinner with his wife. I've had lunch with him many times, and what he has done is just awful. First of all, I would favorably compare Israel's morality to Richard Goldstone's anytime. Richard Goldstone took a job as an apartheid judge. He allowed dozens of black people who were unfairly tried to be executed. He
says that was the
yeah,
case.
that's what Mengele said too. You know, a lot of people say we just followed the law. We just followed the law. German judges.
You just said that was Mengele.
That was Mengele's defense, and that was what everybody said in Nazi Germany. We just followed the law. When you are in an apartheid country like South Africa, you don't follow the law. You don't affirm the beating, the whipping of African people, black people. That's immoral. That's wrong. Goldstone should have left that job.
But you knew that when you were his friend.
No, I didn't know
You didn't know that he was a judge when he came?
I didn't know that he had allowed the whipping of black people. I didn't know that he had affirmed the execution of dozens of them.
And had you known that, you wouldn't have become his friend?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. I do not deal with immoral people like that. And then to take on the job, knowing he was picked because he was a Jew, and to make the kinds of accusations that at the highest level the Israeli policy was to kill civilians, to refuse to take the testimony of Richard Kemp, the colonel who was in Afghanistan, who would have testified that Israel took more actions to protect civilians. Now, was Israel perfect in Operation Cast Lead? No, I had some criticisms. I wonder about the use of white phosphorus. There could have been legitimate criticisms. There were close questions, but the process by which the Goldstone report was written was so flawed, the people who were on it was so biased in advance that it should be given no credibility whatsoever.
So the problem with Goldstone, you think that if this report would have been written by, you know, Mr. Smith, that would have been okay?
Nobody would have listened. If it had been written by the UN Council on Human Rights, nobody would have taken it seriously. Every week they condemn. The UN Council on Human Rights has condemned Israel more than all the rest of the countries in the world put together. Goldstone was brought in to give it a hechsher, to give it a certification of kashrut. He knew he was being used that way. He told people that he came in with an agenda. His agenda, he said, was to help Israel. But you don't come into a process with an agenda. And he has admitted that if this were a court of law, the conclusions would be worthless. They are, in fact, worthless. The Israeli government is taking actions to investigate. There will be consequences to individual soldiers who did wrong things. I think there should be an independent analysis by experts like former President Shamgar, former President Barak, to evaluate the investigation, to see if the investigation was conducted properly. But I think in the end it would show that Israel behaved certainly better than Great Britain and the United States in Afghanistan and Iraq. The ratio of civilian to military have been better for Israel than other Western countries, and Israel should be judged by a single standard, and Goldstone failed terribly in his job.
You know, you compared actually Goldstone to Mendele to the Nazi
Only
regime.
only when he says, I was following the law. I'm not comparing him in any other way, but when an apartheid judge who has ordered the execution of possibly innocent people and the flogging of people said, I was just following the law, that raises some terrible, terrible memories.
I was going to ask you about the style. I think a lot of people, even in the States, or especially in the States, Jews agree with what you're saying, but they do have a problem with the style. They say, well, it's okay, good for court, you know, when you have to defend your client no matter what. But here we're talking at a different level.
That's my style. Take it or leave it. That's why maybe I wouldn't have been a good diplomat. I say what I think, and I say it with passion, and nobody ever has any doubt where I stand on any issue.
How much involved are you in things going on in Israel? I mean, for example, we have former Prime Minister Olmert in really, so many cases. Would he pick up the phone and say, Alan, can you help me? Could you give me an advice?
I know, of course, former Prime Minister Olmert. He has not called me. I have gotten calls from many other Israelis in trouble over the years, and I'll just give you one general conclusion. I don't know which is the case, but either too many politicians get indicted or too few get convicted. But there is too much of a gap when it comes to political figures in Israel between the indictments and the convictions. There ought to be, in general, about an 80 or 85% conviction rate. But when it comes to politicians in Israel, either too many are indicted or too few are acquitted. I don't know where the fault lies.
I know you've been saying that for quite a while, but you know, since things have changed, we have 2 ministers in jail.
Mm-hmm.
We have many, mayors charged with bribery. We have a president standing on trial for sexual
It's a terrible thing. It's a terrible thing. Look, the president has one job in Israel, and that is to be
Would
dignified.
you have taken his case, by the way?
I can't comment on which kinds of cases I would or wouldn't take.
Theoretically,
or
if
were
he
asked.
came...
You know, I take difficult cases, and
for sure he has a difficult case.
He has a difficult case. No, it is terrible that Israel, faced with so many problems of security, has to also have this kind of issue of corruption, and it's a responsibility of every public official to avoid even the appearance of impropriety.
One of your clients has just been convicted of corrupting many mayors and so on. You know, Apple, you took on the case.
Well, I took on his case in a limited capacity on one issue, on the wiretap issue, and we prevailed on that issue. So when I was his lawyer, we won the case. I haven't been in contact with him now for many years.
And we were talking about the situation in Israel, and we're among friends now. We're in our backyard. We can talk about the dirty laundry. When you look at Israel, well, you often talk about it in the film that you made, The Case of Israel. You talk about Israel being for gay rights and liberty rights and civil rights. And well, we have the feeling in Israel that things are changing. Do you see that change? I mean, the government today is against, you know, the foreign workers, and it's very hard to even have a gay parade in the streets. And
Israel isn't perfect, and Israelis have the right to be very critical of Israel. But French people, the Vatican, the Obama administration has no right to be super critical. They have to apply a single standard. Israelis have a right to apply a double standard. Israelis have the right to demand that Israel be better than any country in the world, just as I, as an American, have the right to demand that America be better than every country. And Israel has a long way to go, even on the issue of gay rights, women's rights, the rights of Israeli Arabs, the rights of workers.
But I'm trying to understand. When was the first time you visited Israel? Was 40
years ago, just now, to interview Golda Meir.
So you've been, you know, following us along for 40 years, and you're very, very active here, and you have a lot of friends. Are you, when you look at Israel, are you satisfied?
No.
Do you feel?
I'm not satisfied. I wish Israel would do better on many, many, many fronts. And I feel comfortable criticizing Israel internally. First of all, I think the political system is in tremendous need of a revision. It creates much too much influence for people at extremes. And there is an aura also in Israel, which I don't like, an aura of political corruptibility, which needs to be improved. And I think there are a lot of things. Look, if I were an Israeli, I'd be super critical of Israel. But as an outsider, I feel that I have to apply a single standard. And if I were a Frenchman, I would see the same kind of corruption in France. Every country has its own problems. Israel is like every other country, except it's the Jew among nations, and many in the world judge it by a different standard.
So with your permission, we'll make one final break, and then we'll come back to, you know what I'm going to say. Oy vey Simpson, of course, because we can't talk to you. Yeah, we can't talk to you without asking you about that one famous trial. We'll be right back. אנחנו נחזור ונדבר כמובן על התוכניות לעתיד של פרופסור דרשוביץ, וגם המשפט המפורסם ביותר, אוי ג'יי סימפסון. מיד חוזרים. תודה שחזרתם אלינו. Professor Dershowitz, we're talking about Israel before we left. So maybe it's easier to love Israel from abroad. You know, it's easier you don't have to live with the flaws.
Well, of course. And I think Israelis often don't appreciate the wonders of this country. No country in history has ever made as much progress in 62 years as Israel. No country has ever contributed as much to the world in terms of technology, medical assistance. Israel per capita exports more life-saving medical technology than any country in the world. Israel saves more Muslim and Arab lives than all the Arab and Muslim countries in the world combined. There are many things to be extraordinarily proud of. Israeli universities, Tel Aviv University, the great research universities have become more important intellectually than many of the European universities, and in less than 100 years. It is a remarkable success story, but imperfect and flawed. Along the way, there are problems.
And what made the change for you? Because for many years, you were first of all and foremost the attorney of last resort. You were in the headlines in the States for the criminal cases.
And
then,
also
like
for
10
African Americans,
Yeah.
civil rights
civil
and
rights.
civil
And
liberties.
I
right?
think about 10 years ago, there was a shift, and
There
you
was.
really started to take this Israeli case in your hands. What made the change?
Well, it happened in two stages. First, in the 70s and 80s, I defended Soviet Jews. I defended Anatoly Sharansky and many of the other great heroes of the resistance and the refuseniks. So I was involved in Jewish issues. Then when I saw Israel being called onto the dock of world opinion and being exposed to a double standard, my instincts as a lawyer for the underdog, as a lawyer for the people who are unfairly charged, clicked in. And Israel was the most natural place for me to focus my attention. I still represent a lot of people in America on death row, people who have been improperly convicted. I like to try to strike a balance between what I do on behalf of Israel and what I do on behalf of Americans who or people around the world who are in trouble.
What are your cases, there are interesting cases that you have now?
Oh, I have some fascinating cases. I have traditional murder cases in the United States. I just won a case where a young man from Thailand had been falsely convicted of murdering 9 people and got him a new trial. I work on behalf of some Israelis. I've been representing Guma Aguiar, who is a prominent
How is he,
Israeli.
by the way?
He's doing well. He's doing much better, and he's a terrific person. He's a wonderful human being, very charitable, and we have a good case, and we hope he'll prevail. So I try to keep a nice balance. I spend about half of my time writing my books. I have a new novel coming out about Israel called The Trials of Zion, which deals with terrorist attack and trials, and hopefully it's a past history dealing with terrorist attacks, but unfortunately it's been a reality for Israel.
And are you even thinking of retiring?
No. How can I retire? No, no, no.
I mean, you just want to do other things? Or?
I do other things. I mean, I have a different mixture, but I love my work. I get up. I'm one of those few people who I never say, thank God it's Friday. I say, thank God it's Monday. In Israel, it would be, thank God it's Sunday. I love my work. I love what I do.
And from all the things you've done, I think, I feel sorry for you because I think there isn't one interview that you can get away without being asked about, the O.J. Simpson case, or as your mother calls it.
O.J. Simpson, right. When I represented O.J. Simpson, people would come over to me whose name was Dershowitz, and they'd say, I'm not sure we're related, it's a common name. People just hated me for that, but it's the job of the criminal defense attorney to take on the most despised cases. When I took on his case, he was facing the death penalty. In fact, I was in Israel when I got the call. I was at a president's conference at Ezer Weizman's house when the call came to ask me to represent him, and I initially said no, and then when they told me that it was a death penalty case, that they were looking for the death penalty, I changed my mind, and I said yes. And I would have been the appeals lawyer had he lost the case, but he won at trial. So my role in the case was mostly advisory.
And you were known to say that even if Hitler would have come to you in a certain circumstances, you would have taken his case.
I would have killed him in my bare hands first. But if no other lawyer in the world would have represented him, and that meant he would have had to go free, as so many Nazi war criminals went free, I'd much prefer to see a Nazi war criminal tried with a lawyer than go free because no lawyer would represent him.
And Ahmadinejad would have picked the phone for any circumstance. I mean, if for any reason he'd need a lawyer and no one would say yes.
Well, I'd see whether he'd accept my advice, and my advice would be disarm, retire, reject your claims against Israel. No, I don't just represent anybody who comes along. I get about 1,000 requests a year, and I only take 4 or 5 cases. So, what I say is any criminal defense lawyer, and I teach students about criminal law, you can't turn down a case just because the client's unpopular, just because the job will be difficult. The legal system wouldn't work that way. When Demjanjuk was on trial here, very few Israeli lawyers were prepared to represent him. And I have to tell you, I give a lot of credit to the people who did stand up and represent him, and I give a lot of credit to my friend Aaron Barak, the president of the Supreme Court, who, though a Holocaust survivor himself and who could have been a victim of Demjanjuk, who, by the way, I think was guilty, freed him because the evidence wasn't sufficient. That showed the Israeli legal system at its best.
And if you'd have to start all over again, would you do it just the same?
Oh, you always learn from your mistakes. There are a few things I would probably do differently, but I have had a very privileged life. I was born relatively poor, and I've been able to do almost everything I like to do. I'm very independent, and I have, good friends and a wonderful family, so I have no regrets about my life.
Would you have still been a lawyer?
Oh, yes. What else could I be? Maybe a journalist asking hard questions like, like you, but I'd have to be a lawyer. I was born to be a lawyer. You know, when I was in yeshiva, I was a very bad student, and my rabbi called me in and said, you know, you got a good mouth, but you don't have a Yiddish cup. You don't have a good Jewish brain. You should do something where you have to use your mouth a lot and not your brain. You should either be a lawyer or a conservative rabbi. He couldn't think of a worse insult than a conservative. I wasn't smart enough to be a rabbi, so I had to become a lawyer.
So I can think of a lot of people who are very glad that you chose that path. Alan Dershowitz, Professor Alan Dershowitz, thank you very much for taking the time, and congratulations for the honorary doctorate that you're receiving. תודה רבה גם לכם. אנחנו נהיה פה בעוד פגוש את העיתונות בשבת ב-5. תהיו איתנו ותישארו איתנו בקשר דרך הרשת. We're still being heard. So I understand your son is a Hollywood producer.
He is, yeah.
And are you a frustrated actor like most lawyers?
Well, every lawyer has a little bit of a frustrated actor in them. I've been able to be on a couple of TV shows playing myself as a lawyer.
Even a movie, I think.
In a movie, yeah. I played a judge in a movie, so it's always been fun, but I like my day job. You know what I really am? I'm a frustrated chazan.
Really?
I love singing, and when I was a kid, I was in the choir.